Hi, for those of you that don't know, I'm Ulisha Bundy, the Matters of the Heart coach, helping people overcome the matters of their heart so that they can move forward and fulfill their purpose. How many of you have seen the Surviving R. Kelly series on Lifetime? And to me, the series wasn't even really about surviving what happened. It was about, let's, tell all and let's expose what's been going on, which was necessary. But I'm saying, my heart is saying, how are we going to help the survivors? This is something they will carry with them for their entire lifetime. And how can they carry that and still be successful in life? How can they carry that and still feel whole? How can they carry that and still feel healed? How can they carry that and be good mothers? How can they carry that and be good sisters, good wives? How can they carry that hurt and still move on and have a successful life? They would need some help. And I began to think about, the group that I've been working with and some of the things that we have talked about, some of the things that we will talk about here in this year as I'm preparing to share even more with them. And so I just wanted to share it here with you all publicly. Surviving sexual abuse. What are some things that you need to know to survive? And so one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that a lot of times those that have been victims of sexual abuse, we tend to hide it, we tend to suppress it. And I begin to think of other types of abuse. If you were out and about in the street, and I do this with me, if you walked through the street and you were a victim, someone stole your purse, you were a victim of theft, and someone stole your bag, someone stole your identity, or something like that, you would let it be known and you would, track that person down until you got your stuff back, till you recovered all, until you had justice. If someone came and they physically assaulted you, you would take them and you would, demand that they be buried under the jail. You know what I'm saying? Yes, many of you would defend yourself and fight back, but you would also make sure they paid for what they did to you if you were physically assaulted by a stranger. Now, I know there's things such as domestic violence and other things like that, but I'm talking about if, some stranger or, just some random person that doesn't mean anything to you physically assaulted you, you would seek justice. Well, you might not know if you haven't been through it, but someone that's a victim of sexual abuse, somehow they take on the blame, they take on the shame, and a lot of times they would just rather not talk about it. They don't want to recount what happened, and instead they try to bury it all. A lot of the people I'm working with, and my testimony, my abuse started at age 8 and probably went on till I was about 11, 12. And a lot of times, as you become an adult, you just bury it. You might have never told anyone. You may have never told anyone what you've been through. You may have told someone and you may have sworn them to secrecy. Maybe you told and no one believed you. And so you just said, well, forget it, I won't tell anymore. Maybe you told and they believed you, but believe it or not, guys, I know many of you that watched that series were shocked and you were blaming parents and you were blaming the management and you were blaming R. Kelly's team and people for not speaking up on behalf of these girls and these young women, these teenagers. But you know what? I hate to say it, but in a lot of families today, there's children speaking up saying people are doing things to them that they shouldn't do. And you know what they're told? Okay, baby, I believe you, but just don't tell nobody. Baby, it's okay. I'll tell them not to do it anymore. It's brushed under, it's covered up. I'm telling you. So what happens is as we begin to, try to bury it and try to cover it up, life happens. And you know what life does? Life is like a wind that blows the dust off the stuff we try to cover up. And this child sexual abuse is one of those things. If you are a survivor and you're trying to cover it up and you just feel like if I just don't think about it, then I'll be fine. I don't need to deal with it. I don't need any help. I'm just going to act like it never happened. Well, guess what? Life is going to happen and it's going to blow that dirt off of that. And before you know it, it's going to be exposed. It might not be exposed to someone else, but some trigger or something is going to open that wound up. And guess what? You're going to be faced with it. It's going to smack you in your face. And if you don't have any tools, if you don't have any help, if you don't know where to go, this can really be something that stops you dead in your tracks. I'm telling you, a lot of the people that we just shake our heads at, a lot of the people we get frustrated with, a lot of people that wear their feelings on their sleeve, a lot of people that are ready to fight you at the drop of a hat, and things like that have trouble committing and things like that, and it's not just girls, this has happened to boys that have become men as well, are people that have been victims of child sexual abuse. So again, what are some things that we can do? I wanted to, it's like I wanted to reach out to the survivors if I could and just share with them just a few things that, again, I'm starting to share with my group, and some things that we're going through that might help them on their journey to being free from the change and the bondage and the baggage of having been, and I don't like to use the term victim, but having been a survivor of sexual abuse. So one of them is that you're not alone. I'm telling you, sexual abuse, especially when you're a child, can make you feel like you are all alone. It only has happened to you. No one will understand. Nobody knows. It makes you feel so lonely. And if you think about some of the stories from those survivors, this particular, a lot of them told stories, and this is what they said. They said, R. Kelly had them in a room to themselves. They couldn't talk to each other. They had to ask permission to leave. They didn't talk to their parents. They lost touch with their parents, and they had to give up their telephones. You know what? They felt all alone. And there's so many, men and women that really feel like little boys and girls, and they feel like they are in this world all alone because this part of their life they were never able to share. And so one thing I would tell them is that you are not alone. And I hope that that's something they got out of this series that they were a part of. Yes, I'm a survivor as well. I hope what they got out of that was that they're not alone, because I hope they were able to hear one another's stories. Another thing that I'm telling those that I'm working with, and that I will continue to tell them, is we have to work on releasing the guilt and shame. You will be surprised, even those that were molested and touched and abused and raped as little children carry guilt and shame and feel like it was somehow their fault. And all I can feel in my heart as I heard the stories of these young girls and women who were young teenagers or in some, grown women, is I know they are carrying guilt and shame, blaming themselves, feeling like it's all their fault. I've even seen posts of people, talking about them and, saying, they shouldn't have been there, they shouldn't have gone, putting fault and blame on them. And I just want to tell you, it's so often that we just forget where we've been. Maybe you were never a 13, 14, or 15-year-old teenager that thought they were in love. And can you imagine being in love with such a figure, such as R. Kelly? Just put yourself in their position. What would you have done, in that infatuation and feeling like you were in love stage? And before you know it, he has your mind and you're being completely manipulated. And so I will be working with them, and I work with others and help them to be able to release the guilt and shame that comes with sexual abuse. There's so many times we blame the person. Even as kids, we feel like maybe it's how we were dressed, and we might even be told by our family members, you shouldn't have been around them by yourself. I told you, you shouldn't wear that. I told you shouldn't be so smart. I told you shouldn't act so grown. You shouldn't have been so fast. All that helps to put guilt and shame on someone when really we have no control over the negative, nasty, and perverted things someone else does and forces upon us. So third, I don't know if I was giving you numbers, but I am trying to work with people to help them learn to reset boundaries if they once had them and they were destroyed because of the abuse they suffered, to restore boundaries or to build them. I realized I grew up and didn't have any. And had the nerve, to be thinking I'm grown, in relationships as a teenager and a young adult with no boundaries. Just out here in the world, saying yes to everybody, yes to everything, feeling like I could not say no. Not understanding what a healthy relationship looked like. Not even just that, it affected my friendships and other relationships as well. There's many people, they don't have boundaries, with their parents. They don't have boundaries with authority figures. They feel like whatever anyone tells them to do, they have to do. They have a warped sense of honor and all kind of things. And child sexual abuse and sexual abuse can be one of those things that can come in and distort and damage boundaries. And we all need boundaries in our life. And actually, I have an ebook on boundaries. How many of us have them? I've been advertising it and sharing it. I'll make sure I share it again tonight because it's free for the month of January. You can download it and read it. And I pray that it will help you in that area of boundaries. Next, which is my number 4, I'm working with people to help them identify and to deal with their triggers. I'm telling you, the people that we saw in this series, they're going to be different things that they will encounter in their life when they least expect it. That's going to be a trigger, and it's going to completely take them back to that place that they were, that they talked about and shared with us on Surviving R. Kelly. And those of us that have been through sexual abuse, there are going to be things that come up and that trigger us and bring back that memory. They can take us completely back to that place. And I remember I was sharing in my private Facebook group, I actually had a trigger happen a couple of weeks ago, and it completely caught me off guard. I was working out in the gym, and somebody beside me smelled like a whole liquor store, and like it was just coming out of their pores. And I was on the elliptical, and I literally stopped for a minute because that smell was so familiar to me, because that's how my abuser smelled. He was an alcoholic, and the alcohol just came out of his pores, and I hit that smell, and it took me right back to that place. And I thank God that I've done my work, that when I say it took me back to that place, it reminded me of that person, and it reminded me of that thing. But I was able to deal with it and move on and go with my workout. But I was thinking, wow, what happens to those that get hit with these triggers and they have no tools or nothing to use because they're not expecting it? Guess what? You're going to have triggers. Things are going to bring up what's happened to you. But it doesn't have to be something that stops you in your track. I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be something that keeps you from being able to perform for that day. It doesn't have to take you to a place where you're in the corner crying. You can get to a place where you hit the trigger, you remember, and you say, thank God I survived it. And so I'm trying to help people to be able to do just that. And my last thing, which actually with the group I'm working with, we haven't gotten to this yet, because this is not an easy step, and it's not something I push anyone to do. They have to be ready. But that is to forgive and release their abuser. We all know that we forgive for ourselves. We release for ourselves so that we can be free. We forgive and release because we're commanded to by God, and He forgives us, and He's released us from the things we've done. And so, but it's a process. And I know we tell everyone, oh, you got to forgive. And we do a lot of lip service. We forgive. And a lot of times we wait for an apology to be able to forgive. Well, I don't know if you think about this series, if we go back to these particular survivors, R. Kelly ain't claiming that he's done any of this stuff, so he's not apologizing. If they wait for his apology to forgive and release him from the things that he's done, I think they're going to be waiting a long time. You might be waiting for someone to apologize to you for the things that they've done. And maybe they did, and you know what? It didn't feel sincere or what have you. But guess what? You don't need anyone's apology in order for you to forgive and release them. And when my group is ready, I'm going to walk them through some steps on how to do that. And guess what? It might not be a one-time thing. It might be a continual process. So again, thank you guys for joining me tonight. I had to just give you my input on the Surviving R. Kelly. And again, I'm not here to talk about him tonight. I'm here to talk about the survivors. And I thank God that they made it through. All those that spoke, it takes some strength to be transparent and tell your story. I'm not telling you what I heard. I'm telling you what I know. Those that are a part of my coaching group know I am completely transparent, and I share with you my story. And I'll be coming out with it in book form soon. And so I just want to encourage anyone that is a sexual abuse survivor. You're not alone. You can find healing. You can be whole. You know, you can release that shame and that guilt. You don't have to carry that shame and that guilt. And there is help for you. Why don't we encourage people to get some help? Everything we can't fix ourselves. Sometimes we need someone to talk to, someone that's been there. We might need a support group. We might need a counselor. We might need a coach, such as myself, the Matters of the Heart coach. I had to throw that in there. You might need some help, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is help out here for you. So thank you guys for joining me.